clarity in storytelling is extremely important, as opposed to ambiguity.
This is knowledge divided. All I have for you is a gesture.
I've talked about this in other videos, but now I'm going to approach it directly. Clarity is extremely important. It's not about holding the cards to your chest. It's about letting the audience in.
Like the way I met your father. That was so stupid. Grandpa hit him with the car.
They can't have emotional engagement with your story unless they know what's going on. So why I thought about this topic to begin with is I have a teacher that I just took a class with that he really loves obscurity. He loves ambiguity. He loves things where you kind of have to tell your own story, kind of film school type, art house type things, where there's a bunch of elements and you're not sure how they're connected, but you make up your own story. And you might come up with a really good one, but who knows what you'll come up with. I fall into the camp most of the time where I'm just sitting there being confused and frustrated. And that's when the audience is going to turn off the TV or walk out of the theater. What you're being clear about is the information about the character. They call this exposition. It's the background info for the character that you need to get on board with them. The more emotional context you can front load the movie with, the more your audience is going to be on board.
Dr. Brown is dangerous. He's a real nutcase. You hang around with him, you're going to end up in big trouble.
Oh, yes, sir.
You've got a real attitude problem, McFly. You're a slacker. You remind me of your father when he went here. He was a slacker, too.
There's an instinct that writers have to be clever. I have this too, but that's coming from a wrong place. That's coming from a place where you want them to be like, look at me, I'm such a great writer. That's not where you want to be. You want them to be like, look at this story. I know, I harp on that a lot, but it's a very common instinct with writers to be clever, and you gotta work that out of your system somehow, because that's about you. That's not about the audience. You want to write for the audience. For storytelling, you need to have control of where the audience's head is. You want to have control of their track. It sounds manipulative, but you're trying to give them an experience. And the magic about movies is you're having this communal experience with a bunch of strangers feeling exactly the same thing. And it's amazing how that works. It's going to be stronger if you know what your track is and it's a solid track. But if your track isn't good, Hitchcock actually has a term for this that he calls mysterious goings-on.
I dare say you've seen many films which have mysterious goings-on. You don't know what's going, why the man is doing this, why that. Because in the course, before you arrive at that 5-second revelation.
John Harrison was a fiction created the moment I was awoken by your Admiral Marcus to help him advance his cause.
My name is Khan.
And you're about a third of the way through the film before you realize what it's all about.
You don't give the audience enough information, and they are just in the dark. That's mysterious goings-on. You haven't given them enough information. And you're doing it to be clever, you're doing it to...
It is a fact of mystifying an audience.
Perfect example of this is Tenet. Okay, I really like that movie for a lot of reasons, but in my opinion, it's not successful as being a movie. They give you too little information. They withhold it.
This is knowledge divided. All I have for you is a gesture in combination with a word. Tenet.
It's trying to be clever, and it does a good job of being clever, but in the meantime, you lost the audience. They don't know what's going on. They're spinning. The problem with that is their mind is going all these different directions of they're trying to piece things together, and you're not giving them enough information. You have a very narrow thread that you're following in Tenet. He talks to one person, that person tells him to go talk to another person. There's like 3 people that he talks to, that it's this very narrow thread that he's following. And you don't figure out what it's all about until he gets to the 3rd person. You don't know what you're rooting for, because you don't know what's happening in the plot, because they're withholding too much information. And by the time you get to the point where they reveal what's going on, either the audience is in the dark and they're like, I don't know what's going on, or they're just telling their own story with all these different tracks. That's another part of why you shouldn't withhold most of the information, because the audience brings with them their past experience and they'll fill it in. Brains are good at doing this, or they'll just sit there confused. You leave the audience in the dark, basically. And when they're in the dark, they're one of two things. They're confused or they're telling a completely different story. As far as storytelling, you want to be clear. You don't want to just spoon feed the audience the information, that thing that my teacher is avoiding. But he kind of leaned more towards the ambiguous than I was comfortable with. I lean more towards clarity.
Safe and sound now, back in good old 1955.
1955?
Here's a balance you can reach. This is by Andrew Stanton. He gave a TED Talk about this. He calls it the rule of 2 + 2. If you give the audience 4, they're just going to be bored and they've got nothing to do. You give them a 2, and then later you give them another 2, they put them together. It makes you feel smart. You want to make the audience feel clever. That's the thing. That's what I'm getting at with all these things, especially suspense. It's an audience engagement tool. Your storytelling might feel blatantly obvious to you, but to the audience, it is invisible ink. This is a Brian McDonald term. It's like the back of a tapestry. They will never see it. All the little intricacies in the background, making all the beautiful picture fit together in the foreground, they're never going to see it. You know all these things, MacGuffins, mystery boxes, how act structure works, the kind of stuff as a viewer you're not going to see. So that instinct to be clever, abandon that. You don't need that. People aren't going to know how the act structure works unless they've taken a screenwriting class. You want your audience to feel what happens in the movie, and the way that you achieve that is through clarity. The more clarity you have, the more emotional connection the audience will have with your story. The more you follow structure, don't be afraid of clarity because it's invisible ink. It's the structure underneath the track of the roller coaster, holding it up. People are not going to see it or notice it. So forget about it. Don't worry about people being like, oh, this is that and this is that. They don't know. Don't be afraid of telling the audience exactly what's going on. Don't be afraid of setting up the stakes of this is what's happening in the story. The more emotional stakes you have, the more they're going to be invested in your movie. If you're ambiguous with the audience, they will have no idea what to feel by the end of the movie. If you are clear with them, every single member of your audience is going to be feeling exactly the same thing. They won't know why they feel it, but it will be undeniable that they feel this way at the end of the movie. Clarity is not about hitting your audience over the head. It's not about spoon feeding them. Ideally, it's a 2 + 2 thing. But at the end of the day, clarity is going to be invisible ink. It's going to be the strings on the back of the tapestry, the structure under the roller coaster that they're never going to see. All they're doing is enjoying the ride.